Good morning and welcome to the Planning and Development Committee meeting for Thursday, March 17th, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is located on the traditional territory of the Seashelt and Squamish First Nations. Before we get going here, we do have adoption of the agenda. And directors, unless you've got any changes or additions or deletions to make, I'll look for a motion to adopt as presented. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion to receive all reports and presentations and communications materials. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Next up, we've got our delegation. We've got Mark McAdam and Stephen Thatcher from Econ 911. So I invite you guys to come up to the table at the front and we'll turn it over to you.
There? Perfect. All right, and I think I'm going to put up a slide deck in just a second. So good morning, my name is Stephen Thatcher. I am the VP of Operations for Econ 911. Good morning, Your Worship, nice to see you again. I'm wearing a different suit than the last time we met. Mark McAdam is my colleague from Econ. We are going to speak to you a little bit about next generation 911 and what that means for public safety across Canada, but particularly in our Econ realm. There are, sorry, just let me see if I can figure out the interface here to get the slide deck going for you all. There we go. I think I need to do that. Now it should allow me to share the screen. There we go. I believe so. There. All right. How are we doing? Okay. Perfect. We got there. So fortunately, the people who are going to rely on technology are going to be better than I am at managing it. I'm just here to talk to you. Yes. So first I thought I'd start with a little bit of an introduction about what Ecom is, and then we'll go into the details about Next Gen 911. In addition to this being a presentation, I'm really interested in your feedback today, in part because you're one of the first groups that we have discussed our Next Gen 911 plans with, and we know that other communities are going to have exactly the same questions. So the feedback that we get here today, the line of questioning that we receive, I think will be informative in helping us bundle information for groups like this, and also to mature our communications as we move through our Next Generation 911 rollout. So a bit of an ask from you as well as from us. Thanks for the invitation to speak today. I will say it's a pleasure to be here in person. I think we spend so much time on Zoom in the last little while that we forget about the personal contact. It's great to visit the communities that we serve, so thanks for the invitation to be here. Quick background on Econ. So we've been doing police dispatch and 911 call handling since our founding in about 1999. We've got a fairly long track record of consistent 911 service for communities across the country. For reasons we might explore at another time in another venue, the last few months of 2021 were extraordinarily challenging for us as well as other public safety services. Ecom's gone through some growth in the last 20-odd years. It's picked up other responsibilities, picked up other agencies. We've grown from police dispatch into fire and CAD management as well. And we answer currently about 99% of the 911 calls that are made in the province of British Columbia, which makes us effectively a province-wide concern. If you look at those stats from, we handle over a little over 2 million 911 calls, and there's a really interesting split between the ratio of emergency calls that we get for police, fire and ambulance, and I'll develop that a little bit more shortly. So we've got a significant footprint in the Lower Mainland and the Lower Island, and a little bit more of a provincial footprint in terms of our 911 call answer service. So who is Ecom? What is Ecom? Ecom is a corporation formed under the Emergency Communications Agency Act of British Columbia. It's made up of shareholders. You can see the cross-section of Class A and Class B shareholders there. Interestingly, that's how the organization is governed, although some of these groups don't actually receive direct service from Econ as a company. So there's a weird operational disconnect there that we as a company are seeking to remedy by getting more people who are actually paying service clients involved in governance of the corporation. What do we do? There are a lot of things we do in the public safety sector. On the far left, that PCO is police call-taking operations. We take emergency calls, non-emergency calls, and we do dispatch for a number of policing agencies. We do fire communications operations as well for a number of departments across the province. We take, as I said a minute ago, many 911 calls. We do run a tri-service radio network in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia that allows police, fire, and ambulance agencies to communicate amongst themselves during times of emergency. We run a system called PrimeCorp that is a police records management system. We run fire CAD and records management systems. We have some other fire technologies that we roll out, and then we also provide services to HealthLink BC. So if you've ever used Telelink, that's running on our backbone. So a bit of an eclectic mix of technology backbone as well as operational roles. The basic structure for us and our funding is this. We have 25 regional districts throughout the province that we serve for 911. We do that through 8 contracts currently. A number of the regional districts sort of act as collators for other regional districts around them. That gives us an easier client base to service. We also, as I indicated earlier, provide dispatch and call-taking services to a number of independent police departments, a number of RCMP municipalities, RCMP's E-Division, and the provincial government's mandate for provincial policing. And then we also, as indicated, service a number of fire departments in a number of different ways in different parts of the province. All right, so that's a little bit about who we are, and this is where we're going to be going next. I think as all of you know, the current enhanced 911 system, for those of you who have it, runs on a traditional telephone network. It's limited primarily to voice. There are some very specific technologies that will allow people who have hearing disorders or speech disorders who are unable to use traditional telephone equipment to actually access 911 system, but it's not very comprehensive, it's not very accessible, it has to be set up in advance, and there's some severe limitations. What XGen 911 is taking us to is a system that is sent not over telephone wires, but over the internet. And as a consequence of that, the capabilities for data flow are immense. And we're just looking at now at the very, very beginning of this. This is a CRTC mandated switch. It's something that the federal government has decided to do. It's an interesting decision in as much as it is forcing upon everybody who uses a 911 system or has a fire department or a police department for which it has to dispatch, they're going to have to change their infrastructure to become compliant. So this is something that we all have to do, whether you want to or not. It's mandated by the CRTC. It has some fairly tight timelines attached to it, which we are going to strive to meet. So this is the timeline. If you look at voice service, so basically replacing our current voice capacity from telephone to NextGen 911, that backbone is actually active here in British Columbia under TELUS's control. So that network is nominally now in service, although there's nobody ready to use it. What it does mean, however, is that PSAPs, public safety answer points, such as Econ, can start to accept calls coming in on that infrastructure and downstream them accordingly. That is going to be effectively a like-for-like service. There are additional bells and whistles that will come with that. There's going to be much greater location accuracy data from calls that originate on the NextGen 911 service, particularly if you're calling from a mobile handset. So locating the instance of the call is going to be a much, much easier task than it has traditionally been. But that's going to be the basic change as we move over to voice. There will be some other benefits. For example, right now when we get a 911 call, it can be downstream to only one agency. So the call can go to a fire department, a police department, it can go to an ambulance service, but it can't go to 2 places at once. That's something that could conceivably change from a technology perspective. In the NextGen 911 environment, it remains to be determined how the agencies themselves might want to receive that traffic. The next real marker for NextGen 911 is going to be what they call real-time text. And I think most of us, for better or worse, are familiar with texting on our phones. Those of you with kids, I know you have to, that's the only way you can communicate with them these days. It's a little bit different from that. It is going to be, as we understand it, a technology that's built into the operating system of the telephones themselves. You will not need a special app or launch a special app to do the 911, but what it will allow people to do is to communicate with 911 services without actually having to speak. So they can actually do a character-by-character transmission that will receive the 911 operator. What will make it particularly interesting is that not only is it a text-based message, but it's real-time text, which means that if somebody starts typing a message to 911 and then starts to delete that message, the operator will be able to see that character-by-character progression. So it opens up some interesting training opportunities for us to determine what was the intent of a message that was started. If it was deleted, did somebody reach in? Did they start deleting the message to 911? The theory is this: it's going to offer opportunities to people who, as I said earlier, either can't speak or can't hear and can't have a conventional telephone conversation to call for 911 service. It also means that people who are perhaps at risk of being overheard contacting 911 will be able to do so in silence. I think the other characteristic that I would highlight is that while that is a silent call, the operator at the 911 end will have an open line. So they'll be able to hear the background for additional context around the text messaging. So the deadline currently set by the CRTC for that to become implemented and effective is April 16th of 2024. Now, I will say that the timeline has moved a couple times before. It may yet move again, but that is our current target date for implementation of that technology. And then, really, the major milestone is the decommissioning of the enhanced 911 networks that we know currently. That date is currently set for March 4th, 2025. And by that date, all of the public safety answer points have to be capable of taking in next-gen 911 traffic. There's a sting on that tail, and that's this. Apparently for those communities, those regional districts in particular that have not made that transition, TELUS has the technological capability of keeping the traditional system operating, but it will do so at significant cost. So there is a bit of a clock ticking for us, I think all on that particular front. We'll come to talk about costing shortly. And I don't know the protocol for here, but if any of you have questions, I'm happy to take them now, or if your protocol is to wait to the end, I'm happy to do that as well.
I think we'll just let directors put their hands up as they see fit.
Perfect. All right. So where do we start from your perspective on this next-gen 911 path? The current rules say that local governing authorities, in most cases in British Columbia, that's regional districts, need to reach with TELUS as the backbone provider of NG911 a service agreement. That agreement has been vetted by the CRTC, tariffs set by the CRTC, and so local government agencies, whether that's regional districts, some incorporated municipalities and First Nations in British Columbia, are going to have to talk to TELUS about getting this system up and running. The second step in that process will be talking to a PSAP such as Econ about who's going to take that traffic generated on that system. Now, there are going to be new obligations imposed in that we don't have to the same extent with our traditional 911 system. One of them is technological capability. It's a new technology. I think like most new technologies, has been through and will continue to go through extensive testing. There are going to be standardized national pictures for what technology capabilities and what redundancies need to exist. Anytime you do something on the internet, you think you're all aware, cybersecurity becomes a major issue. The growth in cybercrime has been enormous. The risk to organizations that are using this technology is considerable, so you can imagine that a good deal of our planning is going into ensuring that the risk to our service systems interruptions is minimized. Provision of GIS and mapping data. Obviously, with enhanced location data, that really only makes sense if you have a map to follow to get to where the emergency is. So one of the obligations on communities is going to make sure that they have up-to-date maps of their communities provided to us for mapping purposes, so that when you get a call to a certain address, you can find that address readily. That is going to be, I think, a big boon to emergency services, particularly in smaller areas, more rural areas where local knowledge is really essential to finding something. Here, I think the mapping technology is going to add an additional level of capability that will reduce response times. The other issue that's going to come up for us is privacy-related material. There's going to be a lot more information ultimately flowing through these NG911 pipes. That will require far greater control of access to that data and what can be done with the data, how long it's going to be stored, and for what purposes it can be disclosed. So to give you a sense of where we're going beyond just voice operations, the ultimate benefit of Next Gen 911 will be things like streaming audio and streaming video. In other words, if you're at a crime scene, you can actually show to the 911 operator and subsequently to responding police agencies pictures of a crime process, pictures of a suspect's car. If you're at a crash scene, you can actually show a fire department, this is what I'm looking at. The fire department can make an assessment of what type of equipment needs to get to that scene in order to be responsive to an accident of that nature. Vehicles, for those of you who have recent ones, have telemetrics. They collect all sorts of data about you and your driving habits that are recorded and can be broadcast. So it's not too difficult to envision a future in which if you crash your car and you are unable to call for help, your car will do it. It will say, I've just had a crash, I'm upside down in a ditch, 2 doors have opened, there's still 2 seatbelts that are done up, the crash speed was this rate, and that information, again, is incredibly valuable to first responders. To shrink that scale from a car to the size of your wrist, those of you who wear smartwatches, it's also collecting data and ultimately may be able to call for help. If you're starting to have a heart attack, it doesn't need to wait for you to call, it'll do it for you. And again, we've got to figure out a protocol for how that technology gets used, how that information gets filtered, how it gets dispatched. So the Internet of Things is here, and it's coming fast. Those are technologies that we do not see on the horizon before 2025 and beyond. I think one of the challenges we're going to be faced with is the shiny object syndrome. Is, okay, here's the latest, greatest, we want that. And then 2 weeks later, you've got something that's even shinier. We do have to manage the systems that we're going to engage. And we need, in my respectful view, to do that collectively. There's no point in one agency or one community deciding on one standard and us deciding on another standard, because that's just going to be a recipe for disaster. It's going to drive up costs, training costs. It's not going to be efficient. So there is a long-term discussion ahead of us in terms of what capabilities we want, how we're going to deploy them, and probably as importantly, how we're all going to afford it. So first step for local government authorities is to reach an agreement with TELUS. Now, for those of you who have may embarked on this road, I think I found out a fact yesterday that I thought was kind of interesting. The tariff as it currently exists is not the tariff that you might actually have to live with. In other words, there had to be a place marker, so TELUS has got approval from the CRTC to charge local government authorities a certain amount for using this service at a certain rate. But given the change of, that we know exists in technology, those tariffs are subject to change. And whatever agreement local government authorities sign in the next year or 2 or 3 to get on board may actually change in the future without reference to the original contract. In other words, because it's a regulated industry, the CRTC will set the rates that TELUS can charge. So if you're paying a nickel today, you might be paying 10 cents 2 years from now. And that's just the way the CRTC is going to mandate it. So there's a little gotcha there I wanted to flag for you as you have your discussions with TELUS. Then beyond TELUS, as I say, you now need somebody to answer those calls and to downstream them either to a service that you control or to another secondary service provider that is going to dispatch those calls for you. All right, so what are we doing at Econ? We have, just in the last segment of the year, finished a proof of concept effort with TELUS to make sure that the technology works and that we can connect to it appropriately, that we can handle calls in the way that we expect we can. As I indicated a few minutes ago, the wireline version of that, so the landline version of that, is up and running in British Columbia. The wireless platform will be continuing to mature. They'll start obviously with TELUS phones, and they'll add other service providers as the year goes on. There is an enormous amount of planning that we are currently engaged with. We're on a bit of a sprint between now and the end of June to try to figure out what is the size of our mandate, what technology hurdles do we need to overcome, who do we need to reach agreements with and for what, when do those agreements need to be in place, when do certain communities want to come on board, when are we going to have to be ready to provide them with a service. We're trying to get a right sizing on not just the technology capacities, but what that might mean for us in terms of training our staff, rolling out additional numbers of staff to meet additional burdens. To give you a very specific example, we talked about real-time text. We know from some jurisdictions in the United States that already have this technology that although texting is a small percentage of calls, in most cases about 2 to 3%, the call handling time, the amount of time it takes for a call to be concluded with technology, is vastly greater than what we're accustomed to. Often in a 911 call, we can handle that within a minute, usually less, 45 seconds. We know that count is going to go up for real-time text interactions. So do we need more staff in order to cover that additional handling time? Those are implications that we need to work our way through. The other issue that we're faced with is our current infrastructure is aging out. It needs to be replaced anyway, so this is a fortunate coincidence, but nonetheless there are costing and training implications that go along with that. And then there's the whole business of, right, we've now paid for our infrastructure in order to get this running. Now I've got to come back to you with an estimate of what it's going to cost on an annualized basis. So there are milestones that we are working on establishing. There's more community consultation for us to come. We have a lot more conversations with our clients in order to try to put these things in the right order, give them some shape, and to the extent possible, flag for you costs, implications as early as we possibly can. So we're hoping to have our production platform ready to go by the third quarter of this year. That's a very ambitious timeline. It won't be all things to all people at that point, but it will be up and running. We have existing relationships with the BC Ambulance Service. We downstream all of the medical calls to them. We have an agreement with the BC RCMP in respect of the 9 operational communication centers that they run across the province, some for municipalities, some for their provincial policing line. As I indicated earlier, we provide a backbone for HealthLink, and we also provide pipes into Sanders Fire for their dispatch purposes. So there is a lot of work to be done just with them, and then we've got our own internal agencies for whom we provide support, and we have to build out our capacity to service them as well. So if you look at the work that we need to focus on, it's addressing our technological issues, our cybersecurity, is working on making sure that we have mapping information that's accurate, and we have to figure out the best way in which we can now use the new information streams that are coming to us to manage our emergency and non-emergency calls. So that's a fairly heavy lift over the next few months. We do have capacity to do most of it. We're searching for additional resources to help us along the path. You can probably imagine that every public safety answer point in Canada is going through exactly the same problem. We're all looking for the same people with the same skill sets at the same time. That's got some market implications which are unhappy. Let's put it that way. All right. So we're trying to put ourselves at the forefront of this technology. We are de facto the 911 call carrier for the province with a couple of outliers. We need to be ready for this transition. We need to partner with our communities and the agencies that we're serving to make sure that we are ready and that they are ready for the transition. So the next issue is pricing. How are we going to price all of this out? So we have a collective bin of equipment and software. Some of that will be capital. Then we have to look at our operating expenses, temporary technology infrastructure to help us along. I cannot tell you today what I think this is going to cost. I can give you a word, and it will be lots. And I don't say that disrespectfully. The reality is we are really struggling to come up with a number because there are a great number of unknowns. And if you look at some of the estimates that we did even less than a year ago in some of our early consultations, they were out by a considerable margin. And that's a number of drivers. First of all, we were just getting our heads wrapped around the technology, so that was limitation one. Limitation two, as you probably know, supply chains are significantly disruptive. Even at any price, there are certain pieces that we're struggling to get. So those are all elements. We expect labor markets to increase as you look at the inflation rate across Canada. Econ in particular is heading into a negotiating year with its labor union. So there will be many, many drivers for cost as we move forward. But our objective as we start to wrap our head around this in the course of the summer is to be able to give very high-level numbers to our partners, whether they're regional districts for 911, fire departments, police agencies, our other partners, with very broad numbers that will have to be refined in future years, but to give you something to work on for 2023 and beyond. I suppose if there is good news in my message today, beyond the fact that public safety will be enhanced by this technology, we're not planning to impose any of those levies this calendar year, so there'll be no new charges in 2022. But you can imagine that we'll be slipping them into your 23, 24, and 25 bills as secretly as we can. I'm just joking. We're going to be quite transparent about what the cost drivers are because you're our partners. So the good news is no new money needed for us directly, but there will be increased costs in 2023, and we do plan to signal those as early as we can to allow you to get that into your budgeting cycle. All right. That's a lot to take in. Pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Just get you to stop the screen share.
You really are testing my limits. How do we do this?
I can do it here, I think, maybe.
Pause share. Stop share. There we go.
There we go. All right. Director Kroll, you're up first.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Toth, and thank you for the presentation. A couple of questions. Econ have had issues with staffing, and it is a huge burnout vocation to constantly be dealing with these problems. So there's that item, and I trust you're working towards solving it. One of the things we have noticed in certainly the weather events and the fire events of last year, communities lost their telecommunications because of cell towers being compromised. So what redundancies are being built into the system? That would be my first question. And this follow-up to that is from my own personal experience being involved with sort of secondary response units, marine search and rescue and land search and rescue. There is a disconnect between emergency services and the communication platforms that they operate on. So I'm wondering, in this new service, is there going to be bridging communication that would enable response to those units? Thank you.
All right. With respect to the technology, I think the technology will lend itself to much more flexibility. I think one of the benefits of the internet is if route A is blocked, route B can generally be found. So it should lead to more resiliency and redundancy in the system overall. The other advantage it will have is we're already looking at ways in which if Econ gets overloaded, busy, if one of our sites goes down for whatever reason, we'll find it much easier to redirect that traffic to another service provider, either another one of our locations, or for example, we could do a partnership agreement with Calgary 911. If there's a weather event in Calgary that they're struggling with, we can help them out. If we're struggling with something in a part of British Columbia, we can divert our calls to them. So there is a little bit more flexibility in the system. How that might ultimately look, I'm not sure. I think those are issues that PSAPs across the country are still looking at, and we're talking to each other about how these things might get mapped out. With respect to communications with other sort of rescue agencies, other search and rescue agencies, I think that's an issue that we can engage in conversations about. I do see the need, I see the advantage of it, and I think the technology will make that easier. But ultimately, I think the limitation there is going to be less one of the communication technology underlying it, but sort of an interagency agreement in terms of what information they're going to share and under what authority they're going to be sharing it.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yes, thank you for that presentation. And the thing I've always wondered about with Ecom is sort of its redundancy in the case of and backup plans in case of natural disasters like earthquakes, or whether it's an EMP or some, all those things. How resilient is the system to be able to communicate in those kind of scenarios?
Well, at the moment, it's not as resilient as we would like it to be. We do have two sites. We have one in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia on Pender Street in Vancouver. We have one in Saanich on the island. We're building out our capacity on the island in order to assist us in the event that something does happen to our Pender location. But part of the business plan that we are looking at over the course of the summer is exactly that question. How do we make our own facilities more resistant to the sorts of threats that you've identified?
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Thank you. Well, I think I could ask questions all day, but I'm just going to circle back.
I won't have all the answers yet.
Right. How is 911 doing right now? There was a lot of negative publicity last fall, I would say. So how is the situation improved?
So I can give you the Ecom snapshot. The last 2 quarters of 2021 were exceptional. If you look at Ecom's almost 21-year history in 911 call taking, 9 of the 10 busiest days for call volume were in 2021. And you all know the drivers that resulted in that. Not only was there significant uptake in calls, we had, as you know, some struggles with the BC Ambulance Service. And to put that very long, complex story into a relatively short explanation, they were short of staff, they were short of call takers. So when our call takers got the 911 call for an ambulance, ordinarily in the real-time world, they would be dispatching that, and that call would be in the hands of the BC Ambulance Service in less than a minute, usually around 45 seconds of handling time for us. Over the summer, at our very worst times, that stretched to 90 seconds on average. And so our bottleneck was we had staff who were on the phone sometimes for minutes at a time, in the worst case scenarios an hour or so at a time, trying to hand off a call. While they were on that call, they clearly couldn't take another call. So our struggle was that even with our size, we were unable to bring in enough staff at peak periods in order to meet demands that were, by definition, unpredictable. I think the problems for smaller PSAPs would have been greater had they been faced with the same wait delays. That said, we did put some mitigation strategy into place with BC Ambulance, and as of this last 2 months, we're back on performance standards for 911 call handling. But I'd ask you to recognize that that's January and February. COVID restrictions are now off. Well, we do anticipate an uptick in call volume to all agencies, and we also know that the summer months are generally our busiest. So we are looking at ramping up our capacity to answer 911 calls, but 2021 was by any measure in our history an exceptional year and a year that we do not wish to see repeated.
Thank you for that. I'm going to just sort of follow up on that. You mentioned the staffing levels. Is there a fair bit of swing in your staffing levels season to season, recognizing that the summer is busier, or is it?
Yeah, so the general approach to that is to have a baseline staff that's sufficient for our sort of everyday call volume through what we call the low season, which would be now, and then to use a combination of auxiliary staff and overtime to meet the demands in the summer months. So that's our general proposition. We're trying to overstaff a little bit for 911 for the summer because we expected it's going to be a busy year.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Seegers.
Thank you. Let me put my hand down here. Okay. It's interesting with all the stuff here. All right, so you have contracts with BC EHS and RCMP division, which is our division. That's
Yes.
who provides service to us. And yet what I seem to hear you say is that we need to determine who's going to handle our calls. So we need to determine whether or not we're going to be working with 911, like Econ, for servicing our calls.
So there are two tiers. One is 911. That's a service provided by TELUS. They provide the technology backbone.
Yeah.
You need somebody to answer that 911 call. So when a resident here places a 911 call, it happens to terminate at the moment at Econ. It doesn't need to terminate at Econ. You could hire somebody else to do it. Mark can sit up in his basement and take your calls. But you need to start that with TELUS because they're the people who are going to provide the pipe that call is going to originate on.
Okay.
And it's really no different from the way the system runs now. It's just a different technology that TELUS is offering.
So how is that different from the contract? So you're providing service to the RCMP, you're providing service to,
But they too have to reach the same agreement with TELUS because TELUS is the underpinning. You as the local government authority have an obligation, if you're going to have a 911 service, to work that deal out with TELUS. That's just for the pipe. Where that pipe terminates with us, that's a separate matter. So that you've got to deal with two agencies. You've got to deal with TELUS on the pipeline, and then if you want to service your 911 traffic, that's the second tier. And then if you want us to handle your police or fire calls, that's maybe the third tier.
okay, so those are the pieces that need to come to us, and our staff need to work out what the options are and what we can actually choose and what the cost is going to be.
So I think it's a bit simplified here in the sense that, you've got the TELUS to deal with. We carry most of all your 911 traffic. And I think we do all the dispatch up here I know we do the police dispatch and fire dispatch. So,
Yeah.
that wouldn't necessarily change. But two things are going to happen. TELUS, you need to enter into, and we know that our next 911 call answer agreement with you is going to look different from the one that we currently have. Because the obligations of Next Gen 911 around security, privacy management are going to put more responsibility on your shoulders in a regional district that you can't actually execute. It's going to have to be your PSAP that does it, so we're going to have to get into an agreement about us taking on your obligations under your agreement with TELUS. And I'm happy to come back with a little bit more ammunition about that. I've got a series of ongoing conversations with TELUS. They're struggling to get regional districts to respond to their emails about getting this thing going. So there are many hats in the ring, and time is running shorter and shorter. Now, I don't know whether I have answered your questions fully.
Not totally.
Okay. What else can I answer for you?
I don't really know.
Okay.
I think I'll go back and look at the presentation again. I'll probably reach out to you directly and just
Please
so
do.
I'm clear about it. So we also have two separate fire departments up here.
Yes.
Who are not under the regional district, who are also going to be going through this as well. Maybe the Seashell Fire Department and the Pender Harbor Fire Department.
Is it Gibson's and Seashells, or?
Gibson's is under the RD.
Yeah.
Gibson's is under the regional district,
Okay,
right? And Roberts
Yeah.
Creek and Half Moon Bay
right.
and Egmont.
So
But
are we dispatching for them?
We are, they all have come under a single contract with Econ for call taking and dispatching for police and fire.
But again, we've got to discriminate the 911 call or origin point from the dispatch work.
Yeah.
And I obviously need to do some work in setting that a little bit more clearly the next time I do this.
yes, please.
It's clear in
So-
my head, but I've been living it for a year and a bit.
I know. I'll look at it and I'll give you a
No,
call.
and I invite you all to
Thanks.
email me or call me if you've got questions.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to take another stab at the backbone here a little bit. So there's a lot of work going on, money coming out from provincial, federal governments about high-speed internet to underserved areas. If that is not a TELUS backbone, does the whole, is there other ways other than TELUS, or does everyone need to be on TELUS? I'm just kind of fuzzy about that.
The deal the CRTC reached in British Columbia is that TELUS is the 911 service carrier. If you go to other, they're the 911 service carrier for the province of Alberta, but if you look further east, you'll see that there are other large-scale telcos that are providing that same infrastructure.
Okay,
So it's an EasyNet, it's a specific emergency services web that's being built out by the telcos across the country, which is one of the reasons that we can then share data so readily with other PSAPs. But the foundational point for 911 call origin needs to be the agreement between all the local government authorities in British Columbia with TELUS, which is the only company that's allowed to provide that service.
Okay, so here's my what-if scenario.
Yes.
We have some islands out in Howe
Yep.
Sound that you passed on the way. They don't have internet fiber there, so if another service provider comes in there, does that exclude them from this?
I don't believe it does. I think there's going to be an on-ramp for those,
Okay.
and the same as on the cellular network, right? Even if you're not a TELUS cell phone provider, TELUS will exchange certificates with the phones from another agency. You'll get on the TELUS backbone, those calls will come in.
And that's agreement which happens with the CRTC, okay. The second question is you call it our invoice that we're going to get, or is that a subscription or something that
Yes.
we get? And the timing of when those approximate numbers are going to, in terms of the SCRD budgeting process and, orders of magnitude, what the staff will be presenting to the board?
I'm hoping to be able to get you something by very late June, early July of this year.
And the plus or minus of that number is going to be
I don't even-
Class D?
I'm,
Unknown.
it is really unknown, and we're turning over rocks in this process, and sometimes you find nice things under the rocks and sometimes you don't. So it's a question I've received from every regional district as I start to have these conversations with them, as TELUS finally gets in contact with them and they go, what's this thing I've got to deal with? I appreciate that it's uncomfortable, and it's uncomfortable for us too. We want to be able to tell you with a fair degree of confidence, this is what your price tag is going to look like in 2023, this is what it's going to look like in 2024, these are our best guesses. But I'd really rather come back to you with a number that I have some confidence in, with that margin of squishiness factor, as one of my colleagues called it.
Okay.
Because, as I say, we've put out numbers in the past that turned out to be, wrong by a factor of 2 in some cases. And again, that's drivers in the environment that we don't control.
Right. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Thank you. Squishiness. I can guarantee our finance department won't look like that word at all.
Ours doesn't either, trust me.
Yeah, okay. So what this sounds like to me, once again, is that the federal government has mandated a bunch of stuff that's going to cost us a whack of money. But are they backing up the truck full of money to us to help us? Yeah.
And let me give,
This, like the mapping is one good example. We have fairly decent mapping, but, it's expensive. It needs to be improved. We don't have the capacity to do that right now, so, yeah.
I think my boss came up with a really great analogy to explain what's happening. So let's assume that Hydro goes to its regulator and says, we want to go from 110 to 240. We're going to go to the European standard. Right? Eureka, everybody, BC or Hydro is happy, they get their new ruling. Each one of us has now got to go to a contractor and get higher tension lines into our house. Other than our dryers and our stoves, every appliance is going to have to be replaced. The wiring might have to be replaced. The outlets are going to have to be changed. The province is not going to pay for that. Right? The regulator may say, yeah, we're going to change the current, but we're stuck with the bill. And that's actually not a bad analogy. You're right on the money. Canada's made a decision. The rest of us are going to pay for it.
All right. Director Ties?
Yeah, thanks. Boy, this is getting cheerful.
I've been in a hot seat since I came to Econ because of the summer and other things, so I'm quite accustomed to it.
Yeah. November 19th, I'm guessing your call volume was pretty high that day. Wondering if you've learned any lessons about disaster management coming out of that event, and just wondering if you could share a little bit of lessons learned out of that one.
Yeah, I think if there's a lesson out of that, it's you have to have great people. I'm astonished that our staff, with the pressures that they've been faced with, continue to turn up for work in the numbers that they do. We had a relatively high absentee rate in the start of January into February. Those numbers are rebounding. They were responsive to calls. When I got a call from the chief of Abbotsford when the flood thing was developing, right, I was able within 20 minutes to get the phone network going, and we had more staff coming in to take non-emergency and emergency calls from citizens of Abbotsford. That was a lesson in and of itself for me that our people are extraordinary, and they had been through, as you know, a really, really difficult summer. So we are getting a little bit more flexible in our shifting, but the reality is emergencies by their definition are unpredictable. We know that they're going to happen. We don't know the when and the how of them, nor do we know their magnitude. And it's really, really difficult for us to kind of make sure that on any given day we have the right number of call takers in work. We are looking at, as the technology allows us to maybe come up with some surge capacity by allowing some people to work from home, so that if we needed somebody at short notice, we could call them up, but if they happen to be there, they can switch on their gear and they can start taking calls. There's some technological restrictions there that we can overcome. There's some workplace safety issues that we have to deal with, some information privacy concerns. I think the other thing that we have become a little bit better at is working with our agencies to make sure that communication lines are relatively short and relatively immediate, that things don't get lost in the bureaucracy of email. And I think the way that we worked through the ongoing pressures with the BC Ambulance Service was a great example of that. Right, we had right from the first days that was becoming an issue, we had executive level engagement to try to come up with solutions in mitigating that problem. Now, again, it's hard for me to see because you got a bar right across your eyes, sir. Was that an answer to your question, or we're good? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Director Hiltz, over to you.
Yeah, last one, Chair, thanks. So there's I'm going to say the downloaded costs on the subscription, and the local governments are going to have administrative costs, negotiating with TELUS and such. What about technology? Are we going to have to change the technology that we have on our towers? Is it going to be other costs other than the already stated costs?
Your municipal services, whether your fire departments, your police agencies, will have to do some upgrading of their technology if they're going to get the full benefit here. My understanding is that for a period of time, sort of the legacy systems will continue to function. They just won't have the additional capacity that we're going to get. So there will be some local costs as well. Again, magnitude, timing to be determined. If you're, if we're doing your dispatch work, we'll build that into our next levy. If you're a standalone agency that's got your own dispatch center, you're going to have to make sure that your equipment's going to be functional. And these are, by the way, thank you, they're great questions because I got somebody recording them. Right, George? Yes, sir. At the back? Because I've already learned a lot from doing this morning, so I can refine the message, and particularly on the issue of the 3 tiers, because clearly that's the stumbling point.
Director Seegers?
And just so you know, this is all clear. It's not working. There we go. You can actually go back and review our video
Perfect.
and see all of it on there as well. So if George doesn't have quite everything down. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. I hate watching myself in any event, but I'll make George watch it again just to make sure he's got everything.
All right, I don't see any hands up. Last call from directors. Yeah.
I just wanted to speak more to Director Tease's inquiry about resiliency. Right. Yeah, we're in a post-disaster facility, can withstand a 7.5 earthquake. We have a fully functional backup center, which is just a few blocks away. That's all ready to go, dispatch, call taking seats. If 911 does go down due to a technology glitch in our building, we can immediately switch over the 911 lines over to BC Ambulance, which is also close by, while we are evacuating to our backup center. And we also have cell phones and radios that we can use while we're en route to receive 911 calls, process them, dispatch units. So we do drill that quarterly, and it's been very effective. We've had to utilize it a few times over the years, myself included, and it worked great. I think we had a scenario where the 911 lines were only out for under 1 minute, and yeah, it was. We're learning from every incident that comes up. We're always reviewing and figuring out how we can do things better and improve and make it more resilient.
Thank you for that. You generated a question over here. Director McMahon?
Well, it's not really so much a question. I'm going to sort of belabor the obvious. Having been on a lot of Zoom calls lately with people from across the province, it is very clear that internet service is not uniform across the province, to put it mildly, and that the claimed speeds that service providers say that they're delivering are nothing like the actual speeds that people are experiencing. So I can see this is going to be a considerable challenge, and it worries me somewhat that we've got a single contract with a service provider who also provides the information on how good their service is. This would worry me if I was living in a number of places in BC right now. So I hope that there will be some independent oversight of how this rolls out.
Noted.
And Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. And this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, TELUS is the major cell provider in the province, and they carry the other cell the other cell networks piggyback on them. So is that correct? Like TELUS carry Rogers, they carry Bell, they, even if you're with a different company, you're still being carried on TELUS. Is that not the case?
I'm not an expert. I know that some of the carriers have their subsidiary lines. So they're, I think Kodo, for example, is a subsidiary of TELUS. Chatter is a subsidiary of Rogers. Rogers does have its own towers. And I think they also will share some of those channels. But I don't know which is the major player in this province. I think it varies province by province.
All right. Thank you. And I see no further hands up. So thank you very much for coming here today.
Been our pleasure.
It's good to see you guys in person instead of the little squares.
It is very nice.
And yeah, you're welcome to join the gallery and stay for the rest of the meeting, or you're welcome to head off if you think you can catch a ferry. So thank you for being here.
Did want to extend an invitation to all of you as well. If you ever have the opportunity to come to Econ and tour our facility, I'm very happy to have you.
We appreciate that offer. I see some curious nods here. So
Please send us information on where and how we contact and set something up. And
Our
I think
emails
we'll-
are at the back of the slide deck. If you've got that available, just call us, email one of us, and we'll arrange it.
Thank
Happy
you.
to see you there.
All right.
Director Kroll, I do see your hand up.
I was just going to quickly ask if we will be copied on the slide deck that was.
Yes, certainly. If you, I wasn't aware that you hadn't been provided with it. But
I sent a copy to Autumn.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll make sure we all get it. Thank you very much.
Thank
all right, our pleasure. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Great.
I was
Oh,
just going
my
to ask
apologies.
if the staff, if the slide deck could also be put up on the website as well as part of the meeting notes,
Great.
please.
Thank you. All right, moving on in our agenda to Annex A, Roberts Creek Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 641.3 2021, 1220 Lockheer Road. Consideration of second reading. Turn this over to Senior Planner Clark.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair. Good morning, directors, committee members, and good morning to Mr. Laxton and Mr. Carson, who I understand are in the room, and good morning to community members who are in the room as well. The application for 1220 Lockheer Road and Roberts Creek seeks temporary authorization to continue a non-conforming use on the property, which currently contravenes the Roberts Creek Official Community Plan and zoning bylaw number 310. The application goal is to secure approval to permit a time-limited use of 4 occupied recreational vehicles, RVs, on the property. The land use process to consider this request involves 2 separate applications. The first is the subject application currently under consideration, which requests an amendment to the official community plan to include the parcel as a temporary use permit area. Second, if that OCP amendment application is approved, a subsequent application for temporary use permit is required to consider the proposed use and the specific conditions to be applied. This application, as you know, received first reading on December the 9th, 2021, advancing the application to an applicant-hosted public information meeting, agency referrals, and both of those are in advance of consideration of second reading. The feedback received during that period, both by the applicant as well as by the SCRD, included some support and also included considerable concern and opposition regarding the land use change. The focus of concern and opposition is summarized in the report, and generally they include the current and future impacts to the environment and neighbors, the isolated process the applicant has followed to develop the property, and the future risks associated with the perceived precedent. Staff wish to also note that following the public information meeting, the applicant made one refinement to their application, which is to request the time-limited use of 4 RVs instead of the originally requested 5. Also of note, in addition to the summary that's provided in the report, staff received Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure's referral comments after the publication of this agenda. And so the Ministry of Transportation wishes to state they have no objection to the proposal. However, if the proposal moves forward, MOTI would like to ensure the recreational vehicles are in compliance with the highway setback regulation of 4.5 meters from the highway right-of-way. And they also require that the property drainage is managed on site and the removal of the drain pipe leading to the multi-use path in the right-of-way. So coming back to the application overall and the consideration today in advance of second reading, staff wish to acknowledge that a decision in either direction will result in undesirable outcomes. With respect for all of those involved, and especially with compassion for the tenants of the property, staff's recommendation is to abandon the bylaw amendment. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Clark. All right, directors. Comments, questions? Director Hiltz, do I see you reaching for a hand or? Not yet? Okay. Director Ties.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to have the rest of the directors to have a bit of a say first, but I certainly do have some thoughts around this matter. So I'm willing to open up for comment, but if nobody raises their hand, then I will get into my little speech here.
I see Director Pratt has raised her hand, so we'll come back to you, Director Ties.
Thank you. So I recognize that there is an incredible amount of, there are both sides to this, and I know, and staff has recommended that we abandon, and I know there is a lot of community concern about this, mainly around the process, the erosion of trust, with the process. However, that also I feel needs to be really taken into, you really need to take into account the current housing situation on the coast. I personally am in favor of the temporary use permit process because it holds the property owner accountable to make the fixes to the land for a limited time use to bring it into temporary compliance and helps to alleviate some concern for the residents that are already living there. I recognize that at the Roberts Creek APC, they had asked for lenient timelines, even though they didn't agree timelines for the residents to move on. However, based on the situation of where we are, I think it's going to take a considerable amount of time for the residents here to find somewhere else. So providing a limited time through the temporary use permit process that brings the property into compliance, doesn't penalize the residents of this property in the same way. Provides some compassion by the local government and provides some surety to the community that there will be an end to this eventually. Thank you.
Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. Although I can't vote on this, and sort of to Director Pratt's comments with respect to the housing crisis, currently there aren't a lot of viable alternatives for the residents in this at this location. In the town of Gibsons, we had an RV situation. I believe one of the people sitting in the room today was one of the residents there, and it was the choice of the property owner not to comply with the TUP that we'd extended, but it's pushed someone into yet another neighborhood. Currently in Gibson's, we have 2 projects on the books. One is the redevelopment of a property. Currently, there's 21 families on that property. And some of them are in recreational type vehicles. There's another property with 14 residents. So we're potentially looking at 35 families or people suddenly going to be finding themselves without a place to live, as they currently do, and no viable options for them to go to. So I certainly agree with Director Pratt that until more viable solutions, we have a housing emergency committee that have been working, Director, just over a year, and we don't have a shovel in the ground that we can say, look, there's an alternative. So, you know, if we displace people out of this situation, where are they going to go? We have another 35 families that are going to be faced with a similar situation, and that's just in the town of Gibson's. So, you know, if procedures haven't been followed properly, you know, I think we all recognize that. But I think the bigger picture is we're dealing with human beings here. And, you know, you can't, in all conscience, push people from pillar to post. We're looking for, you know, options in Gibson's to try and mitigate what we know is going to be coming up. We've set up someone dealing with homeless people. We've got, you know, we're trying to destigmatize some of these issues. But, you know, we can't just continue creating problems and not present viable solutions. So I'm only sorry that I'm not able to vote on this issue.
Thank you, Director Kroll. That was many of the things I've been thinking, but far more eloquently put than I think I could put into words. So thank you for that. I don't see any other hands up, but I'm going to pick on my directors directly. Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I haven't been conscripted before. This is new. I must say I agree with Director Kroll, what he was saying. It's a real tough one. I'm from Pender Harbor area. We pretty much have an OCP that allows trailer parks, campsites, pretty much everywhere that someone wants to build one. And we still have them that are not legal, because a lot of people want to avoid the expense of making them legal. I do see that that's not the case in this instance. So I'm really torn. I want to hear what everybody else has to say before I vote.
Director Hiltz, thank you for volunteering.
Yeah, where to even start? I guess the place to start is this is not an ideal place where we've come to. Lots of situations have put us. These are the worst applications when it doesn't go according to the flow chart of how we expect things to roll out, and then it gets more and more complicated, and so this idea of what to do about it, and the role of the SCRD in creating this supply that we're finding ourselves in this housing crisis. Yeah, I just want to babble here for a little bit for some reason, but I voted to go to first reading at the last vote, and there doesn't seem to be a viable option in terms of. So I am tending towards this continuing support, and letting it go to public hearing would be the next step. So advance it another bit. It doesn't, and in some ways it's a bit of a buying of time to see if there's how the community responds. I'm going to mention the public information meeting. High attendance, and thank you very much for the people who ran that. It was, I would say that's a challenging group of people. Lots of emotion in that meeting. I saw a lot of misinformation about process, what commercial is, what commercial isn't, what affordable is. There's a lot of more discussion. So in some ways, advancing it is a way to have the discussion. That's sort of where I'm You know, am I 41%, 51%? I'm definitely on the fence. I haven't made up my mind. I'm still not sure how I'm going to raise my hand when the question is called. But the compassion that we need to show, and you know, I see the people who are in the residents here, and this idea of it's a test case, a big leap, but there is this overwhelming opposition from the residents, which it's not. I don't find it very welcoming as a community of what the Sunshine Coast is. Right. That's. And in light of global activities that are going on, this welcoming aspect, this is, again, one of these difficult decisions. So I'm going to stop babbling, if that's all right, and let someone else take it. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Hiltz. Director McMahon.
I see. Well, what am I going to say? There are dozens, at least, of properties on the coast that have got non-conforming housing situations going on. And you know, the bylaw is aware of this and are not going around looking for people to evict. We are trying our very best to avoid doing that because we all know what the housing crisis is. But most of these other properties have managed to get along without getting into a war with their neighbors. And this is where it becomes really difficult because now people are angry. There is a perception out there that, you know, if we give an exception, then we're rewarding somebody for breaking the rules. And I don't think it sets a precedent. We don't have to set a precedent. If we don't want to, there's no law about that. But I don't think there's a lot of confidence that if we put out, you know, if we say you should, if you get this TUP, you know, you will do the following things. We don't have a lot of confidence that the property owner is going to live up to the terms. At least certainly the public doesn't. So it puts us in a bad situation. And I'm going to wait to see what Director Tighe on the hot seat has to say.
All right. Director Seegers.
Thank you. I don't vote on this either. I think what Director McMahon was referring to was the fact that the proponent has always indicated that Vancouver Coastal Health has been involved in the sewer system for this, and yet when we referred this out to VCH, they said no, they don't have anything on file. So in my mind, that calls into question a lot of the other things that we've heard from the proponent as well. So yes, there would be conditions. Those things would need to be brought into compliance. And if we move this forward, we do not have a community that's in support. How would moving it forward bring them into support? I don't see how that would move. So I'm not voting on it, but it's a tough one for you.
Thank you. Director Tighe.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies that I can't be there in person because I think this is a topic that I'd rather be able to look people in the eye on, and but yeah, my daughter is at home today, and I need to stick around for her. I do appreciate what that staff has mentioned, that we're kind of in a lose-lose situation here. I don't think there is a good solution to this problem. On one hand, we have we may be evicting tenants who unwittingly entered into this process. On the other hand, there is a clear violation of multiple bylaws and health regulations that were put in place for a reason. So I personally think that we should be following staff's recommendations, as evidenced by the 85 participants in the public information meeting and a number of legitimate concerns voiced about this proposal. I think it is inappropriate to allow a temporary use of this property as described. There are a number of bylaw issues associated with this property, and allowing the TUP will only take care of one of them. The fact that there's no licensed septic field associated with the use of the property speaks to a larger disregard of government oversight. And by the applicant, and claiming ignorance is, in my opinion, not an excuse anymore. This process has caused an erosion in trust in the SCRD and us as an elected board. I think the public overwhelmingly expects us to enforce the bylaws created for exactly this reason. And while I support the need for affordable housing and greater housing diversity, this Wild West approach to infill housing is not something that I can support. I also don't want to send a signal that this is something that we are willing to entertain. I think, you know, if we want something like this to happen, let's do it right and follow the appropriate paths. Our government exists to create consensus-based accountable decision-making, and the longer we allow this to continue, the more we are discrediting the work of our staff and our role on the board. We could take this to a public hearing, but I have not received any impression that public opinion has shifted substantially. The APC is against this, the OCPC is against this, staff is against this, further information is not contributing to this application's cause. So I'm tempted to move staff recommendations as listed on page 1. But before I do, I'd like to ask if we move with staff recommendations, do we need to consider a reasonable timeline for the tenants to be able to attempt to relocate so that they're not basically thrown out on the street right away? So that's my question. What's a reasonable timeline, and whether we need to put that in the motion as we move it forward.
GM Hall or CAO McKinley.
Thank you for the question, Chair and Director. Staff are cautious about discussing bylaw enforcement matters in the specific. In general, the board's policy on bylaw enforcement does provide staff with some discretion around timing. And of course, we have both voluntary compliance and a progressive enforcement aspect to that policy that we can apply. And as the senior planner noted in the intro, there, on staff side, there's an understanding of the factors in play on this file. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Ties, just before I go back to you, my apologies, Director Paul. With you not being in the room, it's easy to miss you in the little squares. So I know that you don't get a vote on this, but did you want to add anything to the commentary today?
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Sorry I couldn't be present and in person. Hopefully be back there soon with the rest of the team. And I appreciate everyone's feedbacks and comments, and it gives me a lot to think about. And in our community and in the Seashell Nation and the SIGD, we've had the same sort of similar instances, and we've had to remove trailers. So I'd have to support and ensure that, you know, there's other paths created for affordable housing. And it'll be a timely project, but that's because I look at the other end of the spectrum and think of Airbnbs that are set up also that could be used for rental units. So is my quick thought process and my comments. Thank you all.
Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot there. Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. Just from what we looked into when we were faced with the situation in Gibson's, because you're dealing with people in a residential situation, and you, in fact, are somewhat governed under the Residential Tenancy Act. And I think it came up in the public in the information session that the proponent provided, that by law, the landlord has to give the tenants a year's notice of movement, which is fine, and then there's a cost involved to the landlord of relocating the tenants if there's a place they can be relocated to. And I think we're blatantly aware on the coast that there is an acute shortage of this type of accommodation. We have contractors in Gibsons who have booked out entire hotels to accommodate their crews. A lot of those crews have RVs who would be happy to bring them to the community to work out of, but there's no space. So it really is a very awkward situation of, you can say it's the landlord's fault and he's going to have to cover the costs, but if there's no place for people to go, where do they go? And are we going to lose, in a case of the contractors, in a lot of areas we're looking for space to accommodate contractors, so gee whiz, we can build housing or accommodation. And, we're sort of back to the wall. If you can't offer people a viable option, where are they to go? And so there's, just to add to the complexity of the thing, there's the whole legality of the Residential Tenancy Act, which we're all sort of technically bound by.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate everybody's input, and I know we've kind of been put to a really difficult decision at this point here. I just feel that in order to reestablish some trust of the community in us as well as staff and the reason why we exist in the first place, to bring order to a process and to land development and land use. I think, I'm going to reluctantly move staff recommendations as listed on page 1. And
thank you, Director Ties, and that's been seconded. Thank you, Director McMahon. Director Hiltz, I see your hand up. Okay, we'll come back to you, Director Hiltz. Director Pratt.
Thank you. I will be voting against this, Director Ties. I believe that we're in a crisis here on the coast, and the temporary use permit process, this whole process has not been ideal. I will fully recognize that. However, we need to provide some compassion as a government for the residents that are there now. And as I said earlier, the temporary use permit process would hold the property owner accountable. We can have limits on the use permit, and it helps to provide that guideline around timelines, which we can't necessarily do through just abandoning this right now. We've heard from the APC. Even the director for this area has said, what can we do about timelines? We can provide that through a temporary use permit process. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz, your hand up again.
Yes, now I remember. It was following on the timelines. Thanks, Chair. All of the details of the conditions that we put on the TUP will come later. So the term, so there is considerable discretion, I believe, at the board on the TUP. Is that kind of just on the timeline? Thank you.
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you for the question. Sorry, just reposition here. That's correct. The temporary use permit process does allow us to place various conditions on how a property would develop or remain developed, or be, in this case, possibly remediated as part of the issuance of that temporary use permit. So those are things that can be developed at the time that we consider that part of the process if we move on to that part. Thank you.
Go ahead, Director Hiltz.
And the follow-up, the number of pads, it's set at 4 right now. Would that be very variable within the TUP as a condition as well?
Thank you for the question. The number of pads would be something that would have to be proposed as part of the approval of the temporary use permit. So it wouldn't be flexible throughout the duration of the permit. It would require another board approval to change that at that time. So it would be whatever the number at this particular time it's proposed is 4. If that was what was written in the temporary use permit, then that would be what the applicant and property owner would have to adhere to. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Right. I have to reluctantly agree with Director Ties that, yes, we can go to a public hearing, but I don't think we're going to get to a different place. We're just going to drag this out a lot longer. And I just wanted to say personally, every time we get one of these situations at the board, I go home again and look at my property and think, is there any way that we could, put a second dwelling on our property or have a friend park an RV? Because I have friends living in RVs. Unfortunately, there's just no way on the property that we have that we can do that. But I certainly am happy to put a call out to the community because we need people to step up. We've got, in addition to people who are underhoused, we have people who are overhoused. And we need to share it around here because this is just grossly unfair. Thanks.
Thank you, Director. I totally agree with you because, I've got a half acre in Seashelt, and legally I can't put a second dwelling on it of any size. And it's astonishing because, my dad's owned the property since the late 70s, and when the mill went through a big upgrade before amalgamation into the district of Seashelt, he had exactly this situation on his property. He had 4 or 5 RVs set up for people who were working at the mill. And it was temporary. They came, they did their work, they left. The land was restored. But that's not legal anymore. Just my own personal comments on it here. Director Ties?
Yeah, I do have some of my concerns around the TUP are timelines. This process has been underway for 1.5 years already. If the applicant were to be imposed upon with requirements that he needs to come into alignment with, that end up taking another half year to be implemented, or longer, because if he's got to redig up his septic field because it's not approved, then God knows how long that might take. Before we know it, when does the TUP kick in? Only when the recommendations, when all the requirements are met, or does it kick in 1.5 years ago when this whole problem started arising? And in this case, are we already halfway through the term? So that's a question I have.
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you for the question, Director Ties. The TUPs cannot be retroactively granted. A time period can be proposed through the temporary use process, but the time that we're in now is just simply non-compliance. So in order to approve the TUP, a timeline at that time, just like the number of RVs that would be permitted on site, would have to be considered. The maximum duration of the consideration of a TUP is 3 years, and there's an option in the Local Government Act that allows for consideration of a second approval. So there can be a maximum, theoretically, of 6 years of a temporary use permit granted, and then the Local Government Act provides no further mechanisms to continue it after that time. Thank you.
Director Ties, you've got a follow-up to that?
Yeah, there's follow-up. So would the TUP only be commencing after requirements are met, or after the board decision has been made?
The TUP would commence at the time that the board decision was made to approve it. There obviously may be some time in there in which the applicant, because this is a retroactive application in which we're trying to bring a property into compliance through that process if it went down that avenue, then there would be obviously some time that we would have to work with the applicant to come into compliance with whatever conditions were contained in the temporary use permit.
But I think the root of that question was it would be effective the board decision. Any compliance issues would just be coming into compliance with the TUP that had been issued.
That's correct. The conditions would be listed in the temporary use permit at the time that it's approved. At that time, it would, there could be timelines stipulated in the temporary use permit as one of the conditions, for example, as to the amount of time that was granted for the applicant to come into compliance with the various other conditions that might be contained.
Thank you.
And follow up again, if the applicant chose to ignore some of those requirements, how long would we be willing to wait until they actually did come into a compliance? And if they never did, when does the TUP get canceled?
I don't know if staff necessarily want to speak to that since it's pretty speculative at this point, but Mr. Jackson?
Thank you. Yeah, applications such as this, when we're in a retroactive situation, are challenging to predict exactly what lies ahead in the various paths that could occur if we continued the application. So staff at this time wouldn't have an answer to some of those questions because we're sort of getting into a bit of a hypothetical realm where we'd have to deal with it sort of as we came across those issues and stay in contact with the board in terms of any recommendations that were needed to in terms of potential enforcement.
Yeah, I'm just trying to voice some of the concerns that I think are in the community, and it's. I think it is something that needs to be considered in the decision making.
Thank you, Director Ties. Director Seegers, you also have a follow-up?
Yes, so I'm looking to clarify the timeline. So first, we would need to get the official community plan amendment bylaw through public hearing and all the various readings. And then the application for the temporary use permit could potentially come forward. And then staff would have to look at all of the conditions for a temporary use permit to provide that to the board for voting on before anything could actually be mandated to start moving forward. Is that correct?
Thanks for the question. The process would be that if the official community plan amendment was moved forward and if it was approved, the applicant would then have the ability to make a temporary use permit application. Once they'd made that, staff would review it and work with the applicant to come up with conditions based on the feedback that we were hearing that we felt were appropriate to be considered as part of the application. If the board approved that application, then the temporary use permit would be considered issued. A notice of permit would be put on the title of the property. At that time, compliance with the temporary use permits, if we look at them as almost a temporary zoning, would basically be a bylaw compliance type of issue. So compliance with the temporary use permit would be much like dealing with bylaw compliance issues and ensuring compliance. If that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. A comment and a clarification. A temporary use permit is a maximum of 3 years, but it doesn't have to be 3 years. It can be less than. Case in point, in the town of Gibsons, we've got temporary use permits that were issued for 1 year and 2 years. They can still come back for an application to renew for the 3-year term, but it's at the decision of the governing body what length that TUP is, and it can be, I believe, a minimum of a year. So that was just a comment. The Director McMahon made reference to, secondary accommodation on some of these properties. In our investigation working on our STR bylaw, we've discovered RVs on properties in the regional district that are being operated as short-term rentals on a couple of the platforms for short-term rental accommodation. So are they meeting zoning and bylaw compliance?
I think we're all aware of properties in our respective jurisdictions that are not in compliance with one regulation or another, for sure. I don't see any other hands up speaking to the motion that's on the floor. Give directors a last chance here. Director Hiltz, are you reaching for a hand? No? Okay. Okay, then I will call the question on the recommendation, voting A, B, D, E, and F. All those in favor of the recommendation on the floor? That's 2 in favor. Those opposed? That's 3 opposed. That's defeated. So, directors, what would you like to do? How would you like to move this forward? Director Pratt?
I guess there's no point in raising my hand if you're going to look to me anyway, so. I was. I'm sorry, I should have had the wording ready, and I don't. So I'm going to say that I would like to move that the board move this forward for, that we move this bylaw amendment to second reading. And do I, sorry, GM Hall, do I need more? Is that specific enough?
GM Hall, you've got your hand up. Would you like to assist Director Pratt with her wordsmithing?
Is it? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Should the committee wish, should a member of the committee wish to make a motion to advance this, there's one step that needs to occur before we move to a public hearing. And that's consistency with financial plan and solid waste management plan. And so for that reason, a possible motion would be the standard, and that Roberts Creek Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 641.2 2021 be forward to the board for second reading, as Director Pratt mentioned. And then a further clause, and that consistency of Roberts Creek OCP Amendment Bylaw 641.13, thank you, 2021, with SCRD's 2022 to 2026 financial plan and 2011 solid waste management plan be considered and reported to the board. And at the time that report comes forward, the scheduling for a public hearing could be undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you, GM Hall.
So I would like to move that as GM Hall has laid out.
Eloquently spoken.
Very eloquently spoken. Thank you, GM Hall.
Thank you, GM Hall. And I do have a seconder for that from Director Hiltz. Thank you, Director Hiltz. GM Hall, I do see your hand up still. Nothing? Okay. Directors, would anybody like to speak to this before I call the question on it? If not, A, B, D, E, and F. All those in favor? That's 3 in favor. All those opposed? That's 2 opposed. Would you like those votes recorded? Sure. Director McMahon, yes. Director Ties, yes. That is passed. So that motion has been carried. All right. I think that's everything to do. Director Pratt.
I was just going to say, if being that we have so many residents in the audience, both, if you could just address when they can speak regarding this issue, because I think there was a bit of a misidea about when they could be able to speak about this, or if they had questions about when they can address them to the committee.
Sure. I mean, any member of the public that wishes to ask questions can do so at the end of the meeting, which hopefully won't be too long. But public feedback can be received anytime. GM Hall, what's that email address for planning? Otherwise, board@scrd.ca comes to all members of the board. And I think it's planning@scrd.ca for the planning department. And then there will be a public hearing being scheduled, perhaps, if this moves through board. And that would be an opportunity for members of the public to speak as well. Jim Hall, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, or?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Director Ties, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I did want to particularly thank staff for an excellent report that I think was very well written and outlines the concerns very well. So thank you to Senior Planner Clark and the whole planning team. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It's 11 o'clock. We're going to take a 10-minute recess before we move on to the next item in our agenda. Thank you. And welcome back to the Planning and Development Committee meeting for March 17th, 2022. Moving right on in our agenda, on to Annex B, zoning amendment bylaw number 310.193, 2021 for 1090 Reed Road. Consideration of third reading and adoption. Turn this over to Mr. Copes.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides a brief summary of the public hearing held on February 8th and provides the record of the hearing, including written submissions. As shown on the record of the public hearing, few residents attended the hearing and comments were in support of the proposal. Please note that the report and the attached bylaw incorrectly state the date of the public hearing as February 9th, 2022, whereas the public hearing actually occurred on February 8th, 2022. Staff recommend that the date of the public hearing be changed on the bylaw and subsequently that the bylaw proceed to third reading and adoption.
All right, thank you very much. Director McMahon, I think your hand was up first.
Yeah, I wanted to further note that on the agenda, it has 1090 Reed Road as an Area F, but I'm not letting it go. It's in Area E. And I would like to move the recommendations on page 21.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder for? I do have a seconder. Thank you, Director Hiltz. Director Pratt.
Do we need to also add in that that other amendment that that Planner Copes mentioned about the date in the public? Does that need to be also referenced in the recommendation?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So I will make that amendment that the public hearing, that the record of the public hearing be changed to
February 8th.
February 8th.
Okay, and I see a seconder for that. So voting on the amendment, I don't see any hands. All those in favor of the amendment? Oh,
sorry, just a clarification. I believe it was actually the attached bylaw that had the incorrect date and not the public hearing minutes themselves.
Can we just make that as
with just a textual,
textual
correction to the amendment? Yeah, I think that's fine. But I will call the question again. All those in favor? All right, that amendment's carried. Thank you very much. So now we have the motion as amended. Director Pratt, I see your hand up still.
I was just going to say, as the chair for the public hearing, it went very, very smoothly, very, very quickly, and congratulations to Planner Copes, as this was his first official public hearing with us, and thank you very much. You did very well with the presentation, and just wanted to acknowledge that publicly. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Copes. With that said, I will call the question on the amended motion. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex C, Sarah Ray Hall Sublease Agreement Renewal with the Pender Harbor Living Heritage Society. And I'll turn this over to Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. The purpose of this report is to seek SCRD board approval in renewing a sublease agreement with the SCRD and the Pender Harbor Living Heritage Society for the Sarah Ray Hall. The hall is a restored historic schoolhouse originally built in 1931. The hall currently acts as an important community use space up in Pender Harbor. For context, the School District 46 owns the hall and the properties upon which it stands. The SCRD has the main lease with the School District 46 on the hall and the property. And subsequent to that, the SCRD has a sublease with the Pender Harbor Living Heritage Society, who are a registered nonprofit volunteer group for the operations and management of the facility. The key conditions of the sublease are outlined in the body of the report and include a 5-year renewal term. The Pender Harbor Living Heritage Society continues to manage and maintain and use the hall for the benefit of community and residents of the Sunshine Coast, and renewal of the sublease is recommended. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Directors, any questions, comments, motions? Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. I do have a question. Yeah, so totally supportive of the motion. In reviewing the report, I was looking at the 2019 report, which previous to this one, and there was, staff brought up some questions about the asset retirement obligations under the accounting. That's for like how to keep this building standing for the future. So I was just wondering, and they're going to be reporting back at some point, and I was just wondering if there's any follow-up on that asset retirement obligation with respect to this property. Thanks.
Thank you. GM Gagnon.
Good morning. Thank you for the question. In regards to the asset disposal obligations, we are now going through that as an organization. So staff are out there busily looking at all of our lease agreements and our commitments and what that means from an asset disposal obligation perspective. And Sarah Ray Hall would fall under that. As far as our lease agreement is concerned, the way that we interpret the lease agreement is that the hall is owned by the SD 46 and would remain the property of the SD 46, and therefore it would be their asset disposal obligation. Has that been confirmed with the school district? We are still under discussions, and I suspect that that will be ongoing, although we do need to land that because I believe that asset disposal obligation is, there's a timeline on that is looming. So I don't have an answer right now other than to tell you what our interpretation of the current lease would lead us to believe and what will lead our discussions with the school district. Thank you.
Director Hiltz, follow-up?
So unknown then, kind of in terms of the future, then that's more information to come. It doesn't really affect this lease at all, as I would understand it there. Thanks.
It has no impact on the lease at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Directors, any other questions, comments? Director Lee?
I think I'd like to make a motion to accept the recommendations on page 28 and thank the SCRD for their attention in getting this done. It is definitely a very important facility for the local community in the Garden Bay area. It's used a lot. So thank you.
Thank you. And I've got a seconder for that. Director Seegers.
Thank you. As a follow-up to Director Hiltz's question, given we're signing a new lease right now, is that something that needs to be clarified in the lease wording so that both parties are clear as to their obligations with regards to the property?
Thank you for the question. The asset disposal obligation would not impact the sublease with the Pender Harbor Living Heritage Society. It is related to the master agreement that exists between the SCRD and the SD 46. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, my mistake.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
And just for curiosity's sake, how much longer is left on the lease with SD 46?
Thank you for the question. That's a great one. 6 years. Yep, I had actually hoped to extend this sublease the full 6 years, but unfortunately, I've been told by my colleagues that 5 years is the max, so that's coming in at 5. But I've already sent an email to Pender Harbor Living Heritage Society, and I'm already in discussion with the school district because that 6 years is going to sneak up on us quite quickly. So we'll have some discussions about the future of the master. Thank you.
I just, because it was just before I started at the school district in 2008 that the lease agreement had been made, and it was made for an extended period of time, which our secretary treasurer at the time was very, very happy with because it's a bit of an anomaly for a school district to be able to enter into that long of a lease with anyone else, but even a local government. And so the policies provincially, once you go over a certain amount of time, it's considered a disposal of asset for that lease bit. So hopefully.
Thank you.
If I may, Chair, I just
sure.
in response to that, I have been given notice by the school district that it will not renew in the same way. So there will be discussions around what that means. And I've also given the heads up to the Pender Heritage Living Heritage, the PHLHS Society. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up, so I will call the question. It's Community Parks, A, B, D, E, and F. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex D, RFP 2261301 Award Report, Parks Operator for Catherine Lake Campground, Dan Bosch Park, and Ruby Lake Boat Launch. And turn this over to Mr. Clarkson. Miss GM Gagnon.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce this report. So as you're aware, the report under consideration is to award the contract for seasonal parks operations for 3 park areas, including Catherine Lake Campground and Park, Dan Bosch Park Day Use Area, and Ruby Lake Boat Launch Day Use Area. This service has been contracted out for more than 10 years now. In accordance with SCRD procurement policy and all relevant trade laws, an RFP was issued for this service. The RFP provided very clear criteria on expected submissions as well as the evaluation criteria, ensuring a fair process for all bids. As you're aware, RFPs and evaluation criteria vary from RFP to RFP. In some cases where the scope of work or the specifications are very clear, for example, when you're purchasing a good, I need a chemical for my pool, the proposal is very heavily rated and almost entirely rated on the financial component. In other cases, however, where a service is being sought, the proponent is asked to outline how the scope of work might be completed, what resources are required, and so the evaluation criteria is often weighted differently, and in many cases, the weight is greater on the business proposal, the relevant experience, the strength of the proponent's team, and the financial component is often smaller. In this case of this RFP, the proponent's relevant experience, qualifications, demonstrated ability to provide the services, and their business plan were the most heavily rated criteria. At the board's request, reports that are provided on contract awards only provide the financial component. And in the case of this type of RFP, it is not an accurate reflection of the overall strength of the proposal itself, and in fact, looks quite awkward. The 2 compliant bids were evaluated based on the same criteria and the same weighting provided in a public RFP process. Based on the overall score, risk management, and values offered, staff is recommending that the SCRD enter into a contract with Swen's Contract Limited. Swen's Contracting Limited has been in business since 1986 and acts as parks operators for the Sunshine Coast BC Parks. You can read more about them on their website. Staff from Procurement and Parks are here to answer any questions that you may have at this time in regards to this report. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. And Director Ties.
Yes, thank you for that. How does this this new contract compare to previous contracts, maybe on an annual basis? Because I think the previous operator wasn't there for the full term of the contract, or for the same length of contract.
Thank you for the question. The contract with the previous operator was a shorter duration, but when we put out this RFP, we asked the service provider to tell us how they would operate the park and what values they could offer, what they thought it would take to run these 3 parks, given some very specific roles and responsibilities that were outlined in the RFP. It was a fairly detailed RFP. And so there are some different things that this operator is proposing, and in fact, the SCRD's involvement is decreased. We foresee some great efficiencies and some great value adds in this particular contract that were not necessarily part of the last contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks Jim Gagnon for the explanation of the awkwardness of those numbers. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. My question is there how is the reservation system going to work this time? Is it's phone based? I understand in the past terms. So is there any innovation? I'm online booking this kind of stuff. Anything happening there? Thanks.
Thank you. That's a great question. Previously, the SCRD was quite involved in this area in terms of the system, the exchange of of cash, the documentation, the recording. And in this particular circumstance, the operator is taking that over and has online registration capability with the services they provide elsewhere. And that is a value add for us for sure. Their online presence is significant. So I would suggest that what we will be doing in our own promotion of the campground is providing direct links to their link where people can go to know where to register and who's running the campground now, and that communication will now move to the operator more than the SCRD. Thank you.
So online reservations is going to be part of the new service?
That is correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ties?
Yeah, how does the financial sustainability in terms of fee recovery through, I guess, campground fees and such, compared to what we're paying for the operator to run the park?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. I'll provide some context around it. In the past, the risk around campground fees has remained with the SCRD, and the contract cost didn't change. In this particular circumstance, the risk with the revenue lies with the the operator now, and the fees remain the same. So if they do not raise their proposed revenue, that risk is theirs. The cost to the SCRD will remain static regardless of what they get from a revenue perspective. We tried to provide them average revenue over the past 5 to 7 years with very limited documentation. So it's one of the risk management pieces that this operator was willing to take on, which is a value add to the SCRD. Thank you. If I didn't answer the question, Director Ties, please, perhaps if you could just reword it a bit for me. Thank you.
Director Ties, you're okay? Okay, thank you. Director Lee?
Yes, I have two questions, actually. One was, we must have been able to do an approximate yearly cost for previous years, and so this could be broke down into yearly costs for the upcoming. Were they close? Are they significantly different, the yearly costs?
Thank you for your question. To answer your question, it was a challenge for us to piece together a budget because we don't budget in the parks area specific to that service. We knew we could pull together what cost the SCRD was retaining in terms of how involved we were in the operations. We knew obviously what we paid the contractor, but to put a precise budget together, we couldn't. That being said, we did provide some general guidelines of the budget in the RFP itself to try and help the prospective bidders understand what it might look like. I would suggest that the proposal and the strength of the proposal of what we are recommending recognized the actual requirements of the service in far more detail and far more robustly than the other service provider did. And we are able to cover the costs of this difference within our parks budget, which would then reflect that it's not greatly far off.
Thank you. You answered the second question at the same time. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Thanks, Chair. The discussion is about rate setting. So the discretion of rate setting resides with the contractor now? Is that, and is there any SCRD interaction with that rate setting? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. It's a great one. The rate setting for the cost to camp remains with the SCRD. However, the contract will provide the opportunity for the operator to propose new rates should they desire them through the 5 years of the contract, but that would require board approval. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, directors. Director Lee, go ahead.
Thank you. can't figure all my buttons out in time. I was wondering, would this proposal provide a little more policing at Dan Bosch Park? Was that part of the, I know the people around Dan Bosch are constantly complaining about noise and overcrowding and all that stuff. So at one time, we used to have a person that stayed there. I was wondering if this new proposal did anything to strengthen the number, more visits, any of that kind of stuff?
Thank you for the question. I will be clear that this operator is not a bylaw enforcer and they are not a policer. They are a presence on site. And we were very clear in the RFP around expectations on the number of trips that needed to occur to both Dan Bosch and Ruby Lake. And I would suggest that the proposal provided by the contract recommendation was clear in their understanding of what we were requesting and reflected the ability to be able to do that. So I am very hopeful, and actually I'm pretty confident that we are going to see some great service out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other hands up. Would any of my rural directors like to make some recommendations? Director Pratt.
I will move the recommendations on page 30 as outlined by staff.
And I see a seconder. Thank you, Director McMahon. This is voting community parks, A, B, D, E, and F. I don't see any other hands up. So all those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on, I'd like to look at Annex E and F. If directors have anything they want to bring out of either of those, that's APC meeting minutes. No specific action items there, I believe. And then, if nothing there, Annexes G and H are communications. So Annex G, they're looking for a letter of support. So I don't know if the committee would like to recommend a letter of support, perhaps. Director Kroll.
Thank you. I've just mentioned that we had a similar request at Council Gibson's this week, and we did pass a recommendation. It is just a letter of support that at least they have a voice at the table, and so I would certainly move the recommendation.
That we provide them a letter of support? Okay. And do I have a seconder for that? I do see a seconder for that. Okay. I don't see any other hands up. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. And Annex H. The Affordable Housing Society is restructuring the way they do their municipal liaisons. This letter was at Seashell Council last night, and we ended up passing a resolution just to reaffirm our appointment and sort of move them over to the new committee. So I don't know, I'm not sure who's our representative here to the Affordable Housing Society. Director Seegers?
Thank you. I think we sent this letter out to, or directors actually received the letter. Director McMahon has indicated she would be willing to be our rep, I believe. Sorry,
yeah.
Director McMahon, yeah?
Yeah, the question was who's our current rep, and actually...
We don't have one.
We don't have one?
We don't have one.
Oh, all right, well, that makes it easy. Is anybody else interested in this post, though? I don't want to nab all the fun stuff.
I'll make a recommendation that Director McMahon be appointed as the representative for the Sunshine Coast Regional District to the Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society's or Intergovernmental Liaison Group.
I'll second that. I don't...
Yeah, I would accept unless, like I say, anybody else wants to take it
Director
on.
Pratt?
I'd be happy to tag team with Director McMahon on this if that would work. So maybe co-liaisons, if that.
That would work.
Okay, so I would make that as an amendment that Director Pratt be a co-liaison with Director McMahon.
All right, and I see a seconder for that. Director Kroll, I see your hand up.
The only comment I was going to make is it really needs to be someone from the areas as opposed to the municipalities, because we already have representation in that group. So just in case anyone was wondering why Mayor Seegers and I aren't jumping up and down hysterically saying we want to do it, we're already there.
Okay, I'll call the question on the amendment to add Director Pratt as a co-liaison. All those in favor? All right, and the amended motion, all those in favor? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. We have no new business, but we do have an in-camera section. And so I ask for motion that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with Section 91A of the Community Charter. Personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. And moved and seconded. All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. So I don't see any, well, we do have, no, we don't have any members of the public in attendance, so. No.
Chair, if we could please promote the person in the attendee. Thank you.
I have done that. IT, if you want to take us in camera.
seconders, and all those in favor. All right, motion carries. Let's go back to the public meeting portion.
Looks like it's been flipped over already, so feel free to finish it off, Director Ties.
All right, so a motion to adjourn the meeting. All right, I see second of movers and seconders, and all those in favor. All right, thank you for everybody for that meeting. And we'll see you guys next week.
Take care, Andreas. I hope your daughter's feeling better soon.
Yeah, she's power washing right now, so I think she's okay.